Just a month before retirement, I was called into the manager's office and accused of delaying the delivery of parts one had never even touched. 45 years of service, and I was thrown out like a thief. It was early morning, still dark outside. The river fog drifted low over the cranes, wrapping the hulls of half-built ships in a grey shroud. I remember wiping my hands on an old rag as the foreman's assistant approached, saying quietly, "Step into the office, John Peterson. The boss wants a word." The boss was young, maybe 35, with smooth hands and expensive shoes that never touched the oil-stained floor. He didn't even look at me when I entered. "John Peterson," he said, flipping through a folder, "there have been delays in the fittings department. Missing parts, misreported dates. We've traced the issue to your section." My ears rang. I thought I'd misheard. "Sir," I said calmly, "my section hasn't handled fittings for over a year. That was transferred to supply logistics. Ask." He cut me off with a gesture. "You're suspended. Effective immediately. Leave your badge." The guard at the door didn't meet my eyes. My badge, scratched and worn, had hung on my chest since Brezhnev's time. I placed it on the desk. The click of metal on wood sounded final, like the closing of a hatch before launch. Outside, the wind from the river bit through my jacket. The clang of metal echoed from the docks, indifferent, as if the world had already moved on without me. I stood by the gate and looked back at the shipyard, my shipyard. That place had seen everything, my first job as an apprentice, my first paycheck, the day I met my wife when she came to deliver tea for the crew. She'd passed away 10 years ago, and since then, the yard was the only place where life still made sense. Every rivet, every bulkhead, every drawing on the wall bore a piece of my years. I'd stayed through storms, shortages, management changes. Never once was I late, never once drunk on the job. And now? Suspended for negligence. I went home by the embankment. The smell of diesel and salt lingered in my clothes. I passed the same watchman who had greeted me every morning for decades, and even he turned away, pretending to check his clipboard. That cut deeper than the dismissal itself. At home, the silence felt heavy. My wife's shawl still hung by the window, faded and warm to the touch. I sat beside it for a long time, hands clasped. After 45 years, what does a man do when his name is dragged through mud? I poured myself tea, stared at the steam rising from the cup, and whispered, not to anyone in particular. They think I'll just fade away quietly. But something inside me refused. Maybe pride, maybe habit, the same stubborn streak that once kept me welding through the night when others gave up. I didn't know it then, but that quiet morning by the river was not the end. It was the beginning of something I hadn't done in years. A fight not for the job, but for my name. I joined the shipyard at 20, fresh from trade school, with calloused hands and the arrogance of youth. The year was 1978, the docks were alive back then, humming like a heart made of steel and sea wind. The cranes moved day and night, sparks from the welders lit up the dark like fireworks. I remember thinking, this is where real men build something that lasts. I started as an apprentice under Old Master Harold Carter, a legend in his own right. He had one glass eye and a voice that could carry over the engines. He taught me more than welding or fitting. He taught me pride, not the loud kind, but the quiet one that comes from doing your work right even when no one's watching. Shipbuilding, he used to say, tapping his pipe on the railing, is about trust. A man's seam holds not because he's watched, but because he respects the sea. It was there, on that same slipway, that I met my future wife, Laura. She brought lunch for her father, the crane operator, and I helped her carry a thermos up the steps. She smiled, shy but steady. We married a year later. Her laughter was like the clanging of metal in sunlight, sharp, clean, alive. When she passed from illness, the shipyard became my anchor. I buried myself in work, arriving before dawn, leaving long after the whistles blew. The men joked that I could navigate the docks blindfolded. In truth, I didn't know how to live anywhere else. I climbed the ranks slowly, not through favors, but through persistence. By 50, I was foreman of the assembly bay, responsible for 100 men. We launched tankers, trawlers, even a few research vessels. Each one carried a part of my soul into the sea. I kept every launch photo in a wooden box. Sometimes I'd look at them after shift, the faces of crews, proud and dirty, framed by a horizon of masts. So when they fired me, it wasn't just a job they took away. It was 45 years of meaning. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing the echo of the manager's words, delaying delivery, negligence, and the hollow sound of my badge hitting the desk. My pension papers were ready, my tools oiled and labeled for the next man. I had imagined walking out proudly, shaking hands, hearing the last whistle with my name in the farewell speech. Instead, I was erased. Neighbors noticed, of course. In towns like ours, the shipyard is the heartbeat, everyone knows who's in and who's out. When I went to the store, people nodded cautiously, pretending not to know. Even the cashier avoided my eyes. Word spreads fast when a man is fired under investigation. I tried to keep busy, fixed the balcony railing, polished the clock Laura had loved, but my hands trembled, and used to idleness. I started waking up at 5, out of habit, only to sit by the window, staring at the cranes across the river. The worst part wasn't the humiliation. It was the silence. No one called. Not one of my men. Not even George, my second in command for 10 years. I couldn't blame them. The new manager had made it clear, anyone seen helping me might share responsibility. Fear spreads quicker than truth. Then came the letter. A formal notice, my pension frozen pending clarification of disciplinary circumstances. That line broke me. I sat there for a long time, the paper trembling in my hands. I'd given them everything, my back, my sight, my years, and now, in one stroke of a pen, they'd erased it all. But the thing about men like me is this, we don't crumble quickly. We rust slowly, and only where neglected. That evening, as the sun sank behind the cranes, I opened my old wooden box of shipyard mementos. Blueprints, sketches, certificates, launch photos. Among them lay something else, a folded letter from Master Harold Carter, written the year he retired. Asterisk, one day they'll try to tell you your work doesn't matter. Don't argue. Just make them look at what you built. Asterisk. I read that line over and over, until the word steadied my breath. Somewhere deep inside, a stubborn ember began to glow again. I didn't yet know how, or with what strength, but I understood one thing clearly that night. They could strip me of a badge, but not of what those hands had built. And if I had to remind them, I would. 3 weeks passed before the world stirred again. It began with a knock on my door one gray afternoon. I opened it to find a man with a cane and a crooked smile, Sam McCarthy, my old friend and mentor from the welding shop. His hair had gone silver, but his eyes still held that spark of dry humor. "Well, John," he said, stepping in without waiting for an invitation, "you look like you've been sentenced to shore duty for life." We sat by the kitchen table, the same one Laura and I had shared our evenings at. I poured tea, and Sam poured out the news. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You didn't hear this from me, but, the new manager, what's his name, Adam something, he's got his nephew lined up for your post. Kid's barely 30, no field hours, but plenty of connections. They needed a reason to remove you, and they found one." I didn't answer at first. The clock ticked behind us, the pipes hummed softly. I watched the steam curl from my cup. "His nephew," I repeated, slowly. "Yep. Word is, they pinned the missing parts on your section to make it official. The paperwork was all done in one day. They didn't even investigate." I felt something shift inside me, not anger, not yet. Just a kind of sharp, cold clarity. "Sam," I said, "you're sure of this?" "As sure as I am that tea's gone cold," he replied, tapping his cane. "And one more thing, the blueprints for the turbine modules. The ones from Project Sokol. They've been using your revisions for years, but there's no record of you as the author in the latest documentation. Adam's nephew submitted an updated version last month. His name's on it now." That was when the tea tasted bitter. I went to the cupboard and pulled down an old metal tube, the kind used for storing blueprints. Inside were the originals, rolled tight, edges frayed with age. My handwriting was still there, neat and measured, *I. Peterson, revision 1986, approved. *. Every calculation, every weld specification, mine. They hadn't just fired me. They'd taken my name off my own work. Sam watched me unroll the papers. "You still have these?" Laura insisted I keep copies. Said one day someone might try to take credit. He nodded approvingly. Smart woman. Smarter than any of us. For a long time, we sat in silence. The winter light slanted across the table, catching the ink lines on the yellowed paper. Then I said, almost to myself, if they want a quiet retirement, they'll get a storm instead. Sam smiled faintly. Now that's the John the First remember. After he left, I stayed up half the night going through old folders. I had kept meticulous records, work orders, approvals, memos, even letters from ministry inspectors. I didn't realize until then how much history a single man could leave behind in 45 years. Each document was a thread, and together they formed a web strong enough to hold truth. But I knew better than to rush in waving papers. The yard had changed, honor meant little to those who saw everything as a stepping stone. If I wanted justice, I'd need to do this properly, and publicly. That's when I remembered a name, Karen Collins, a journalist from the city newspaper. She had once written a feature about the shipyard, interviewing me about the old methods of manual welding. I still had her card somewhere. I found it tucked behind a photo in Laura's album. The ink was faded, but the number was still legible. I hesitated a long while before dialing. "Hello," a calm female voice answered. "Good evening, this is John Peterson. We met years ago at the shipyard. You wrote that article on craftsmanship." "Oh. Of course, I remember," she said warmly. "How are you?" I took a deep breath. "I've been dismissed under false charges. And there's something happening there, documents altered, designs stolen. I have proof." There was silence for a few seconds, then her tone changed, quieter, sharper. "Do you have evidence?" "Yes." "Then I'll meet you tomorrow. Same place we met for the interview, by the docks." When I hung up, I sat back in the chair and stared at the folded blueprints. Outside, the fog had lifted, and I could see the lights of the shipyard flickering across the water like distant stars. Laura's shawl still hung on the chair beside me. I touched it gently and whispered, "You always said my hands build, not destroy. Let's see if they can build my name back." That night I slept soundly for the first time in weeks. Because now I had purpose again, and purpose, for an old worker, is the closest thing to life itself. Morning came with a drizzle that blurred the cranes across the river. I wore my old navy coat, the one with the torn pocket, and carried the metal tube of blueprints under my arm. The ferry ride to the docks was slow, almost ceremonial. Each ripple on the water seemed to echo the same thought, "Don't back down now." Karen Collins was waiting near the storage hangars, just as she promised. Same sharp eyes, same quiet voice. She looked older, but not softer. "John Peterson," she said, shaking my hand. "You came prepared, I see." I handed her the tube. 45 years worth of work in there. And the proof that they've tried to erase it. She unrolled one of the drawings, studying the careful handwriting, the signatures, the stamps. This is detailed. You even have ministry verification codes. I kept copies of every project I worked on, I said. Old habit, I never trusted the archives. Good, she said, meeting my eyes. Because this isn't just your story. It's about a system that eats its own builders. We spoke for nearly an hour, walking along the pier. I told her everything, the accusation, the manager's nephew, the pension freeze. She took notes, asking calm, precise questions. When I mentioned the falsified documentation, her expression hardened. That's criminal, she said. If we publish this, we'll need verification, something official. I can get it, I replied. The union still keeps records of project authorship. If they haven't been tampered with. Her eyebrow lifted. That's your next step then. I thanked her and headed toward the yard, my heart thudding like a hammer. The guard at the gate recognized me but looked away. Orders from above, he muttered, embarrassed. You're not allowed inside. I smiled grimly. I won't go in. Just tell your manager I came to speak. 15 minutes later, Adam himself appeared, immaculate as ever, his expression one of studied annoyance. You again, he said. You were told to stay off the premises. I'm here to clear my name, I replied. You accused me without proof. He smirked. We had enough proof for HR. That's all that matters. You should be grateful we didn't press charges. Something about his voice, so casual, so sure of his untouchability, made the air feel heavier. You took my designs, I said quietly. And gave them to your nephew. His smile faltered for just a second. Careful with your words, old man. Defamation can be costly. Truth's free, I said. And I have documents to back it. That's when he snapped his fingers. 2 security guards appeared. Escort Mr. Peterson out, he ordered. Permanently. They didn't touch me, just stood close enough to make their message clear. I turned to Adam. You're making a mistake. You think time and power are on your side. But both rust faster than you think. He waved dismissively, already walking away. Goodbye, John Peterson. As I stepped outside the gates, I caught sight of a few workers peering from the assembly hall windows. Familiar faces, men I'd trained, laughed with, taught how to weld straight and true. Their eyes met mine for a second, then darted away. Fear had sealed their mouths. By evening, word of my visit spread. The next day, one of my old colleagues, George, called from a payphone. His voice trembled. John, listen, they told us if anyone talks to you, we're out. But people know. Some of the guys in documentation have seen your name missing from the new records. They're scared, but not blind. Thank you, George, I said. That's enough for now. The walls of silence were high, but they were starting to crack. Over the next few days, I gathered more, old memos, invoices, a letter of commendation signed by the ministry itself. Each piece was another nail in the coffin of Adam's lies. Karen Collins called twice, her tone sharper each time. The editor wants solid verification, she said. If you can get the union to confirm authorship, we can go public. So I went to the union office. The head, an old bureaucrat named Stephen Sanders, looked uncomfortable when he saw me. John Peterson, he sighed, this situation, it's complicated. Management insists your case is closed. Closed doesn't mean right, I said. You still have records from the design bureau, yes? He hesitated. Officially, yes. Unofficially, he glanced at the door, then back at me. If something were to appear in tomorrow's meeting, something undeniable, I couldn't ignore it. I understand, I said, nodding. That night, I laid everything out on the kitchen table. Blueprints, documents, the pension letter, the commendations, decades of a man's life reduced to paper. I thought of Laura again, of her soft voice saying, asterisk, don't let them take what you built. Asterisk. My hands no longer shook. The plan was forming, steady as steel. I would bring it all to the union meeting, and not quietly. Karen Collins would be there too, with her camera and her notepad. If they wanted to erase me, they'd have to do it in front of the whole shipyard. For 3 nights, my kitchen became a war room. Papers covered every inch of the table, designs, memos, work orders, certificates, even old Polaroids from ship launches. Each sheet had a story, a date, a mark of effort. I handled them the way a craftsman handles his tools, with care, respect, and purpose. I made 3 copies of everything. 1 for the union meeting. 1 for Karen Collins. And 1, sealed in an envelope, for my lawyer, an old Navy officer I once helped with a vessel certification issue. The man owed me a favor, and more importantly, he respected order. By the second night, I began to feel like my old self again, focused, precise, grounded. The noise of humiliation had faded. In its place grew the calm rhythm of preparation. Every document I reread reminded me of a life measured not in paychecks, but in integrity. I smiled, tracing the signature of the late engineer Mark Morris, who'd once written on a design margin, asterisk, Peterson, your welds will outlive us all. Asterisk. Maybe that was true. On the morning of the meeting, I dressed as if for work, blue jacket, polished boots, cap. The air smelled of salt and iron. The river was still, reflecting the cranes like tall crosses against the sky. For the first time in weeks, I felt light. At the tram stop, I saw Sam waiting with his cane. You sure you want to go through with this? He asked. I've worked my whole life for that yard, I said. If they take my name off my work, what's left? He nodded, approving. Then walk in with your head up. Men will follow courage, even if they pretend not to. We arrived early. The union hall was already filling with men, welders, machinists, dockhands. I saw familiar faces, some looking away, some offering quiet nods. On the far side, by the window, stood Karen Collins with her notebook and a discreet camera. She gave me a small nod, the kind that said, asterisk it's time. Asterisk. Before the meeting began, I approached Stephen Sanders, the union head. His brow was damp, his tone uneasy. John Peterson, please understand, this gathering is for internal matters. The management has been lying, I interrupted calmly. And I have proof. I'll present it quietly if you allow me, or loudly if you don't. He hesitated, then sighed. 5 minutes. But make it clean. I opened my briefcase and laid out the folders on the table, originals and copies. The blueprints, the memos, the commendations. Then I spoke, not loudly, but clearly enough that even the back rows could hear. For 45 years I've worked here. Not one reprimand, not one missed deadline. A month before retirement, I was accused of negligence. They said I delayed deliveries of parts one never touched. I accepted the investigation, but there was none. Instead, my name was erased from designs I created, and replaced by someone else's. Murmurs spread. Some men leaned forward, others stiffened. I lifted the blueprint tube and unrolled the design for Project Sokol. The signature was mine, bold, clean, approved by the ministry. This is my work, I said, my voice steady. And here, I held up a recent copy from the archives. Is the same drawing, same measurements, same errors even, but with a new signature. The manager's nephew. Gasps, low and sharp, rolled through the hall. Forgery, Sam muttered behind me. Plain as day. Stephen Sanders rubbed his temple. John, if this is true. It is, I said. And I'm not the only one they've stolen from. Just the first who refused to bow. Karen Collins raised her camera. The flash was small but powerful, a spark that lit the room in silence. Adam wasn't there yet, but I knew word would reach him before long. And when it did, he'd have to walk into this hall, into the truth, with no guard to hide behind. I gathered my papers slowly, deliberately, and said, "Gentlemen, I'm not here for revenge. I'm here so the next man who builds something can sign his name without fear of losing it." Then I sat down. The hall stayed quiet, but the air had changed. The tide, once against me, had begun to turn. It didn't take long. 15 minutes after I sat down, the doors of the Union Hall swung open. The chatter died instantly. Adam walked in, his polished shoes clicking sharply against the floor. Behind him came two company lawyers in dark suits. He carried himself with the easy arrogance of a man who thought he owned the air he breathed. "I see we've turned the workers' meeting into a circus," he said, glancing at the papers spread across the front table. "Very disappointing, gentlemen." Stephen Sanders stood, pale but firm. "Manager Orlo, Mr. Peterson has presented serious evidence concerning design authorship and dismissal procedures." "Evidence?" Adam laughed softly. "From a retired foreman with a grudge. Come now, this is absurd." I rose slowly. "Retired, yes. But not erased." He smirked, looking around the room. "John, let's be reasonable. You were let go for negligence. The company has moved on. Dragging old documents here won't change that." I picked up one of the blueprints and held it toward him. "Then explain this. Project Sokol. My handwriting, my dimensions, my initials. Ministry verification. And this," I placed a printed copy beside it, "your nephew's version. Identical, except for the signature. Even the ink smudge is in the same place." A low murmur rose among the workers. Sam leaned forward on his cane, eyes glinting. Karen Collins scribbled furiously. Adam's jaw tightened. "These are old drafts. The new version was digitally archived." "Then you won't mind if we compare them publicly," I said. "With the ministry seal. Unless, of course, the ministry no longer signs your approvals." His confidence faltered. He turned to the lawyers. "We shouldn't dignify this. Let's leave." But Stephen Sanders blocked the exit. "No, you'll stay. The union has the right to examine authorship disputes. Especially when the ministry is involved." I unrolled one more document, a letter from 1993, bearing the shipyard's own logo and stamp. "This is my commendation for the very design you called into question. Signed by the previous director. Before your time." Silence fell. You could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. Adam tried to laugh again, but it came out strained. "So what? You want your name on a piece of paper? Take it. But that doesn't undo the fact that your department caused delays." "Delays caused by your nephew's inventory errors," I said, pulling out a final sheet, a delivery log signed by the young man himself. "I may be old, but I can still read dates." Gasps spread across the hall. Someone clapped once, hesitant, but enough to spark the rest. Adam's face flushed crimson. "You think this little stunt will change anything? I have superiors." "Yes," I said, "and they're reading tomorrow's paper." Karen Collins stepped forward, camera in hand. "For the record, Mr. Orlo, would you like to comment on the forgery allegations?" He turned on her. "This is private company business." "Then perhaps you shouldn't have made it personal," she replied evenly. He stormed toward the exit, but Stephen Sanders' voice stopped him. "Adam Orlo, pending internal review, you are suspended. Effective immediately." The words echoed in the hall. The man froze mid-step, shoulders rigid. For a moment, I felt no triumph, only quiet exhaustion. Years of loyalty condensed into this one strange moment of vindication. Adam didn't look back as he left. The lawyers followed. Stephen Sanders turned to me. John Peterson, you'll be reinstated until your retirement papers are processed properly. And the ministry will verify your authorship. Applause broke out then, not thunderous, but steady, respectful. Men stood, some awkwardly, some with tears in their eyes. I nodded to each of them. Sam leaned over. Told you, he whispered. Courage draws men out of hiding. Karen Collins approached, offering her hand. You've done more than clear your name. You've reminded them what integrity looks like. I smiled faintly. Integrity's like a hull, invisible when it holds, loud only when it cracks. Outside, the rain had stopped. The cranes stood still, silver against the clearing sky. For the first time in months, I didn't feel small walking past them. The next morning, the yard felt different. Not quieter, just honest again. Men greeted me at the gate like they used to, nodding with that subtle, wordless respect you only find among workers. Even the guard, the same one who'd once avoided my eyes, straightened up when I passed. Good to have you back, John Peterson, he said quietly. Inside, the clang of metal and hiss of torches filled the air, the music of work I'd missed like breath. I didn't return to my old post. Stephen Sanders arranged for me to serve out the final month as a consultant, to help with documentation and training. A polite formality, perhaps, but I knew what it really meant, a gesture of apology from the yard. They gave me a small office overlooking the docks. From there, I could see the hull of a half-finished ship, the Zaria, her steel plates gleaming under morning light. I'd helped design her framework years ago. Seeing her rise again felt like watching a child stand after a long fall. That first week, people began stopping by my office, young engineers, welders, apprentices. Some came with technical questions, others with something heavier. Peterson, one of them said, we knew something wasn't right. But, you know how it is. I know, I said, not unkindly. Fear's a heavy thing. But truth's heavier when you try to bury it. Even Sam came by with his cane, leaning in the doorway. You made the front page, he grinned, holding up the newspaper. There I was, not my face, but my story. Asterisk, veteran shipbuilder restores his name. Asterisk beneath it, a photo of me holding the blueprints, the yard in the background. It wasn't fame I felt, it was balance. The kind of peace that comes when the scales finally stop trembling. A week later, Stephen Sanders called me into the main office. The ministry completed their review, he said, sliding a folder toward me. Your authorship on all major designs has been officially reinstated. And your pension, full, retroactive to the day of dismissal. I opened the folder slowly. My name, printed clearly, restored where it had been erased. Each line felt like a breath of clean air after months in smoke. I looked up. And the manager? Dismissed, Stephen Sanders said simply. Forgery, conflict of interest, procedural abuse. He won't be back. There was no triumph in me, only a quiet certainty that justice, when earned patiently, can still exist in this world. That evening, after everyone had gone home, I walked down to the docks. The river was calm, the water dark and deep. The Zaria's hull loomed above, waiting for her launch. I ran my hand over the cold metal, feeling the weld seams, clean, even, true. It struck me then how much of my life was in this steel. Every rivet, every plate, a record of who I'd been, what I'd stood for. I reached into my coat and pulled out my badge. They'd returned it to me that morning. The metal was scratched, worn smooth by time, but it still caught the light. I pinned it to my chest one last time and whispered, that's better. Then, quietly, I unpinned it again, set it down on a nearby beam, and left it there, not as a symbol of loss, but of closure. The next day, the yard held a small send-off. No speeches from directors, no pomp, just my men, the smell of oil and sea wind, and a simple wooden plaque that read. John Peterson, 45 years of honest work. They handed me a ship model made from spare brass fittings. I smiled, holding it up to the light. When it was time to go, I shook every hand, looked each man in the eye. "Work straight," I said. "Don't let anyone sign your name for you." As I walked away from the shipyard for the last time, the whistle blew, long and low. Not for a shift change, but for farewell. It was the sound of dignity restored. Retirement began quietly, as most endings should. The mornings came slower now, no alarms, no fairy horns, just the soft creak of the river wind through my window. I'd sit with tea and watch the cranes across the water, their arms still moving, lifting steel as they had my whole life. Some days, I'd see the younger men working where I once stood, their helmets catching the sun. It didn't sting. No bitterness left, only gratitude that the place still lived, that honest hands still shaped ships there. Karen Collins visited once, after her article made its rounds. She brought me a printed copy, framed neatly. "You know," she said, "people wrote letters after the story came out. Old workers, teachers, even young engineers. They said your case reminded them that decency still has weight." I smiled, setting the frame on the windowsill. "Then it was worth it." She looked at me curiously. "Did you ever think of suing?" "You could have." I shook my head. "No need. You can't build peace out of revenge. Justice was enough. A man shouldn't look for payment where he's already been repaid with truth." When she left, I sat in silence for a long time, thinking of Laura. The shawl still hung by the window. I'd kept it there all these years, not out of sorrow, but memory. She'd been right about everything. She used to say, "You can't force respect, you live in a way that earns it, even from those who wrong you." That night, I opened my wooden box one last time. The blueprints lay neatly stacked, their corners yellowed. I didn't need them anymore, their work was done. I tied them with string and placed them back, closing the lid gently. Outside, the shipyard lights glimmered across the river. I imagined Azaria setting out soon, her bow cutting through the gray morning, carrying a piece of me out to sea. I thought of Adam, not with anger, but with understanding. Maybe someday he'd realize that shortcuts in life don't lead to victory, only to emptiness. Some lessons only time can weld into a man. And as I sat there, I realized something simple: I hadn't fought to win. I'd fought to remain myself. In a world where names fade and papers lie, that's no small thing. When the clock struck midnight, I stepped out to the balcony. The air smelled of oil, metal, and the faint salt of the sea. I raised my cup to the cranes, to Laura, to every man who still believed in honest work. "Hold your line," I whispered, the old saying we used on the docks. "Hold it straight. Because in the end, that's all any man can do, keep his line true, his name clean, and his dignity unbroken, no matter who tries to take it from him." And if someone reading this ever finds themselves standing outside the gates, accused, forgotten, or cast aside, remember, the truth doesn't need to shout. It only needs to endure. Just like steel.